Elijah and Joshua were born on the same day, just a few minutes apart. Identical twins, they were inseparable from the start. They grew up in a modest house, but one full of love, right in the heart of the Bronx. Their parents, Isaac and Rebecca, worked hard to support the family but always made sure to be there for their kids. The house may not have had luxuries, but it was overflowing with affection, laughter, and, above all, baseball. It was Isaac who first introduced them to the sport. From a young age, he'd take them to the park to play with an old leather glove and a bat worn down by time. He'd never been a professional player, but he loved the game and wanted to pass that passion on to his sons. By the time they were 5, Elijah and Joshua were already swinging their own bats and running around the backyard pretending to be Yankees legends. Their love for the New York team became part of their very identity. Every night, before bed, they'd sit next to their dad in the small living room, listening to the games on the radio. The static of the broadcast mixed with the announcer's voice, and the twins would cheer for every hit, every run, every incredible play. They'd close their eyes and imagine themselves there, inside Yankee Stadium, wearing the iconic pinstriped uniform, playing in front of thousands of passionate fans. It didn't take long for that passion to turn into a real dream. Whenever they had free time, Elijah and Joshua were out on the neighborhood field, practicing relentlessly. Elijah was quick and precise with his throws, while Joshua had sharp reflexes and an impeccable read of the game. Even as kids, they already showed natural talent, working in sync like they were one. On the streets, at school, or at home, they were always together. They were more than just brothers, they were an unbeatable team. They knew what the other was thinking with just a look, finished each other's sentences, and never made decisions without talking it through first. To them, life revolved around two things, family and baseball. And every night, before bed, they'd follow the same routine. They'd close their eyes and whisper together, like a silent promise, "One day, we're gonna play at Yankee Stadium." From their first days at school, Elijah and Joshua stood out in baseball. It didn't matter what position they played, they always showed talent and dedication. On the school team, they quickly became the best players, impressing their teammates, teachers, and, most importantly, Coach Matthews, a former minor league player who saw something special in the twins. "You guys have something rare," he'd say after practice. "If you keep working hard, you can go far." Those words became fuel for them. Every free minute was dedicated to baseball. After school, they'd race to the field, throwing balls to each other, practicing their swings, and perfecting their moves. Even when their friends went home to rest, Elijah and Joshua kept going, sweaty and out of breath, but determined. There was a unique bond between them. Even without speaking, they knew what the other was going to do next. But at the same time, they also competed. Every practice turned into a challenge. Who could throw faster? Who could get more hits? Who could steal more bases? It was a healthy rivalry that only made them grow as athletes. However, over time, small differences started to show between the brothers. Elijah was outgoing, always the first to strike up a conversation in the locker room or crack jokes during practice. He loved the attention he got when he made a big play and dreamed of one day becoming a baseball star. Joshua, on the other hand, was more introspective. He preferred to watch the game in silence, analyzing every detail. For him, strategy and discipline were more important than the spotlight. These differences became more apparent when they talked about the future. Elijah would go on and on about what it would be like to play for the Yankees, do interviews, and be recognized by the fans. Joshua shared the same dream, but deep down, what really mattered to him was the feeling of the game, the joy of being on the field and playing alongside his brother. Despite these small differences, the essence of their bond remained unchanged. Whenever they'd finish a grueling practice and look up at the darkening sky on the horizon, one would say to the other, "We'll get there, together." And even without saying another word, both knew that promise was stronger than any rivalry. It was an afternoon like any other after school. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in a soft orange hue, while Elijah and Joshua, as always, were at the park, playing baseball. The field was empty, just the two of them, together, with their gloves and bats. The sound of the ball hitting the bat and Elijah's shout when he caught a ball were the only things filling the space around them. "Do you think one day we'll play here, at Yankee Stadium?" Elijah asked, not stopping to chase the ball. Elijah caught the ball Joshua had thrown, smiling, but this time, something in his eyes seemed different. "We will, but I just want to be there with you. It doesn't matter where. I just want to play," Joshua replied, as if it was more than just a dream. Elijah shrugged, laughing. For him, the dream of being a Yankee was everything. For Joshua, it was just the chance to share the field with his brother, to live that moment, that instant of happiness together. At that moment, Elijah looked up at the sky, and something in the vast blue made him think that maybe life was more fleeting than he liked to imagine. "I'll be right back, Joshua. I just need to swing by home. Mom asked me to help with a few things," Elijah said, still tossing the ball to Joshua but already starting to walk toward the exit of the park. Joshua waved without looking. "All right, don't take too long," Joshua shouted, focused on a pitch. But even with the promise of returning soon, something in his gut, something in Elijah's tone, made his heart race. He didn't know why, but it felt like time was speeding up. He watched his brother walk away, heading up the street toward their house. A cold shiver ran down his spine, but he forced himself to ignore it. Elijah was always there for him, and he knew that wouldn't change. Joshua stayed in the park for a few more minutes, practicing alone. His throws felt empty, as if the field was missing something, or someone. Elijah walked absent-mindedly, his mind on the chores at home. The traffic on the street was heavier than usual, but he didn't pay attention. The streetlights weren't on yet, and the sound of the street seemed distant as he crossed the crosswalk. It was then that the sound of a car speeding through the air cut through. Elijah looked up too late, the screech of tires echoing around him. He saw the car at the last second, but there was no time to escape. The impact was brutal. The sound of the car slamming into Elijah's body was deafening, and in the next instant, the driver fled, disappearing as quickly as they arrived. The street, once so busy, was now silent, except for the screams of people rushing toward Elijah, lying on the ground. Joshua, still playing baseball in the park, heard the scream, and something inside him froze. He stopped mid-throw, looking around as if something had shattered in the air. He ran into the street without thinking. In the distance, he saw a crowd of people gathered around Elijah. Joshua's heart raced. His body felt heavy, like he was stuck in a nightmare. When he got there, he saw his brother lying on the ground, motionless, unable to move. People were gathered around, an ambulance was on the way, but the fear in their eyes said it all. "Elijah, bro," Joshua whispered, falling to his side, touching Elijah's face with trembling hands. Elijah, still conscious, looked at him with dull eyes. His breathing was heavy, but he smiled weakly. I told you we'd get there, together." were Elijah's last words before his gaze slowly faded. Joshua felt time stretch, as if the entire world was in slow motion. He couldn't breathe, couldn't believe it. Elijah, the brother he'd shared every dream, every play with, was now there, with his final words, that promise that seemed to unravel before him. The ambulance arrived, but it was already too late. The impact, the driver fleeing, it all happened so fast. Elijah didn't make it. Joshua stayed there, in the middle of the street, the sounds of traffic and sirens echoing around him. But all he felt was emptiness. The promise of together that now seemed lost, slipping away like sand between his fingers. Now, Joshua didn't know how to go on. The dream he and Elijah shared no longer made sense without his brother by his side. Elijah's funeral was a moment without color. The house was filled with people, but silence seemed to be the only sound that truly filled the spaces. Joshua didn't care about the empty words of comfort being directed at him. Every "I'm sorry" felt distant, as if it was coming from a place he could never reach. Nothing they said seemed enough to bring Elijah back. The emptiness that had formed inside him was vast, and no word or gesture could fill it. The moment the casket was lowered, Joshua felt as if the whole world, life, time itself, had stopped. Elijah was no longer here. He couldn't smile anymore, he couldn't run across the field, share dreams, jokes, or even the little fights that always made them laugh. All of that was now in a distant, unreachable place. Joshua looked at Elijah's casket, and for the first time, felt an unbearable weight in his throat. He blamed himself deeply. If he had gone home earlier, maybe none of this would have happened. If he had insisted that Elijah come with him, maybe they would still be together, still dreaming of the future. As friends and family said their goodbyes, Joshua stepped away. He couldn't look at anyone. The emptiness was inside him, and he just wanted to escape to a place where Elijah's memories could leave him in peace, where the ghosts of guilt could vanish. Baseball, their plans. All of it now felt pointless. He didn't want anything anymore. At home, the atmosphere felt unrecognizable. The house, once filled with life and laughter, was now dark. Elijah's absence was palpable in every corner. In their room, where the two of them used to plan games, pretend to be Yankees players, and talk about their dreams for the future, there was now only silence. Joshua looked at Elijah's empty bed, the baseball bat still leaning against the wall. He slowly walked over, picked up the bat, and as he felt its familiar weight, it was as if a wave of pain flooded his chest. The smell of the wood still felt the same. He remembered the laughter, his brother's advice, the times Elijah would grab his hand and say, "We'll get there, together." But now, together was an empty word. His mother hadn't left her room. She seemed in a trance, absorbed by a deep sadness that consumed her day by day. There was no food on the table, no conversations, no more laughter. She sat in silence, staring into space, her eyes swollen from crying so much. Joshua saw her like this, and his heart broke all over again. But he didn't know what to say to her. He didn't know what to say to himself. His father tried to be strong, trying to keep the family together, but his face was marked by pain. He would start to cry at unexpected moments, when he thought no one was looking, but he would quickly pull himself together and pretend to be fine. He tried to give Joshua advice, telling him he needed to be strong, that he needed to move forward. But Joshua couldn't see the point in anything. He just wanted everything to be a nightmare, to wake up and find Elijah by his side, as always. The routine of the house, once full of voices and laughter, was now reduced to echoes of a time that no longer existed. Joshua couldn't look at the baseball field anymore. He couldn't hear the sound of the bat hitting the ball without feeling like something inside him was breaking. He wanted to pull away from everything, but the emptiness seemed to follow him, no matter where he went. In his room, while he tried to sleep, he could still feel Elijah's presence. The smell of the baseball bat, the sound of their voices during practice. Every corner of the house seemed to carry the mark of his brother. And the pain, the guilt, was unbearable. Every memory felt like a knife in his chest. Joshua wished he could go back in time, run to the park, and call Elijah to leave with him, but he knew that would never happen. And now, he had to learn to live with that absence, with that void. And, more than anything, he knew he would never be the same. The pain of losing Elijah seemed to grow increasingly unbearable. Joshua had tried to distract himself with the small tasks of everyday life, but nothing seemed to provide relief. The joy he once felt watching a baseball game, imagining the feeling of being on the field, now turned into anguish. Every time the sound of the ball hitting the bat echoed in his memory, it was as though an open wound in his chest began to bleed again. He couldn't bear to watch a single game anymore. It was as if the baseball field, which should have been his refuge, had become a cruel reminder of everything he had lost. At school, things weren't any different. Joshua had once been known for his easy smile and constant friendship with others. But now, he isolated himself. He didn't want to talk to anyone. He avoided his friends, the teachers, anyone who tried to approach him. Instead of laughing and chatting about trivial things, he spent his days in silence, sitting alone in the corners of classrooms, his mind heavy with thoughts he didn't know how to deal with. The school hallway felt like a distant place, where he could barely recognize himself. His coach, concerned, tried to reach out to him. He knew what Joshua and Elijah were capable of, knew the spark in their eyes when they talked about baseball. When the coach saw him for the last time, with his shoulders slumped and his gaze empty, he felt something needed to be done. "Joshua, you need to return to the team. What you and Elijah built can't end like this," the coach said, trying to ignite a spark of motivation in the boy. But Joshua didn't have the strength to respond. The idea of going back to the field, of playing without Elijah by his side, felt like a sacrifice too painful to bear. He turned his back and walked toward the school gate, avoiding any more words. At home, the routine was equally difficult. Joshua couldn't find purpose in anything. He looked at the place where Elijah's bat was kept, remembered the promises they had made to each other, and wondered if he would ever be able to fulfill them alone. Without Elijah, he felt incomplete. Life seemed to have lost its brightness, and Joshua found himself questioning the meaning of everything, the reason to keep going, to try to be someone. The absence of his brother was like a shadow that followed him with every step, and he didn't know if he would ever be able to escape it. With each passing day, the emptiness inside him only grew. And the more he tried to distance himself from baseball, the more the longing for Elijah consumed him. Joshua began to understand that he wasn't just battling the pain of loss, but the fear of continuing to live without his brother. Months had passed since Elijah's death, and Joshua's world was still engulfed in a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. He spent his days in a colorless routine, wandering the streets of the city like a spectator of his own life. The pain was still there, unwavering, and with every step he took, it felt as though he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Baseball, which had once been his passion, was now an unbearable burden. One afternoon, without any particular destination in mind, Joshua decided to walk to the park. Perhaps a change of scenery, a bit of fresh air, could help clear his mind. When he arrived, the sound that had once excited him, the sound of the ball hitting the bat, children laughing, now only made him feel the weight of Elijah's absence. He sat on a distant bench, watching a group of kids playing baseball on the field. The scene was familiar. They played casually, without the pressure of a championship or dreams of going pro, just for fun. But for Joshua, it was impossible not to see the difference. He immediately remembered the afternoons spent with Elijah, the two of them training together, making promises about the future. Baseball, at that moment, no longer felt like a dream, but a painful memory. Suddenly, a child approached him. She was holding a bat but didn't quite know how to use it. The little girl, shy, looked up at Joshua with eyes shining with hope, and without thinking, she said, "Hey, can you teach me how to hold the bat? I saw you playing with your brother before, and you were really good." The words hit Joshua like a stone to the heart. He hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also a strange impulse, something that called him to take that small step. He looked at the little girl, and without knowing why, he slowly stood up. Every movement he made, like holding the bat, reminded him of Elijah. His brother's words, "We'll get there, together," echoed in his mind. He took the bat from the girl's hands, trying to hide the pain. At first, his body was rigid, as if the simple act of teaching was a betrayal of Elijah, a breaking of the promise they had made. But when the girl held the bat the right way, and the two began practicing, something inside Joshua began to shift. The feeling was different. He felt a connection, a warmth he hadn't felt in months. It was as if Elijah was there with him, whispering in his ear, as though he still lived in that movement, in that passion. Every swing in the air, every step on the field, felt like a message from his brother, telling him to move forward. But deep down, a part of Joshua still felt that he was betraying Elijah's memory. The idea of returning to baseball was something he couldn't fully digest. How could he continue with their dream without him? How could he honor Elijah's memory if it meant carrying on in something they had both loved, but now without his presence? The guilt consumed him, and he wanted to give up, to return to his solitude. That night, Joshua couldn't sleep. The images of the field, Elijah's words, the laughter they had shared, everything was mixing in his mind. And in the darkness, he finally fell asleep. When he least expected it, Elijah appeared in his dream. His brother was there, smiling as always, with eyes glowing with confidence. He looked at Joshua and said, simply but with deep meaning, "Don't stop playing because of me." Joshua woke up with tears in his eyes but with a lighter heart. He knew what he had to do. The next day, he got up, grabbed the old glove and the baseball that Elijah used, and with a deep sigh, did what he thought was impossible. He decided to return to the game. The pain was still there, but now Joshua felt that, in some way, he was keeping the promise he had made to his brother. He wasn't betraying Elijah. He was honoring his memory, living the dream they had shared. Joshua's path to overcoming the loss of Elijah was not easy. But something inside him had changed. After that night in the park, when Elijah's presence seemed to manifest through a simple gesture, he could no longer ignore the desire to return to baseball. He knew there was more than just a sport waiting for him. There was the promise he had made to his brother, the promise not to let their dreams die with him. Thus, Joshua began to train on his own. The afternoons, which had once been a sea of emptiness and sadness, were now filled with the sound of the bat hitting the ball and the echoes of his own steps on the field. He remembered every practice with Elijah, every laugh they shared, and the feeling of being able to play together. The pain didn't completely disappear, but little by little, he began to feel that he was honoring his brother's memory. His coach, who had been watching Joshua's struggle, noticed the change and sought him out. He knew how much the boy loved the sport and how much potential he still had to shine. So, he approached Joshua with a welcoming smile. "Joshua, are you ready to return to the team?" the coach asked, his voice filled with confidence. Joshua looked at the coach and hesitated for a moment. But he knew what he had to do. He accepted the invitation, and in doing so, he felt that he wasn't just returning to baseball but also returning to himself, to the part of his life he had lost when Elijah passed away. When Joshua came home that day, his mother watched him with a confused yet hopeful look in her eyes. She had already noticed the change in her son, the way he was getting up in the mornings with a bit more enthusiasm, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. She didn't say anything, but she saw him leave for practice, and something in her heart warmed. The sadness was still there, but now there was a glimmer of light. Joshua's mother was also starting to recover, finding strength to live each day. On the day of his first game back with the team, Joshua felt his nerves tighten his chest. The stadium was packed, and the pressure of being the center of attention felt almost unbearable. He was getting ready to step onto the field when he looked at his jersey. The number 22 was there, the same number Elijah wore. It wasn't just a number. It was a constant reminder that Elijah was with him, that he was playing for both of them. In that game, everything seemed to be working against him. The opposing team was playing aggressively, and Joshua could feel the weight of every gaze, every expectation. His mind began to doubt itself. Can I do this? Do I deserve to be here? The questions piled up, and the fear of failure began to take over. But in that moment, something inside him sparked. He looked up at the sky, just as Elijah used to, and whispered, "This one's for you, brother." He could feel Elijah's presence, as if he were right there beside him, guiding each movement. Joshua took a deep breath, focused, and prepared for what was to come. When the pitch was thrown, Joshua didn't hesitate. With a precise swing, he made perfect contact with the bat. The ball flew out to the outfield, and Joshua ran to first base. The stadium erupted in applause, but all he felt was a profound and comforting silence, as if he were at peace with his brother, as if this was Elijah's way of saying, "You did it." In that moment, Joshua realized he was not alone. Elijah would always be with him, in every step, in every game. He had fulfilled the promise. And, for the first time since the loss, Joshua felt that life could, indeed, move forward. Time passed, and Joshua continued his journey in baseball, now with a renewed focus. He was recruited to the university team, where he stood out not only for his talent but for the passion he carried with him. Every game, every practice, was an opportunity to honor his brother and the dream they had shared, the promise that one day they would play together at Yankee Stadium. Now, the future was clearer than ever, and each step Joshua took reflected this eternal connection with Elijah. On Joshua's birthday, he went to Elijah's grave, as he always did, but that day, something was different. The pain of the loss was still there, but he also felt a sense of pride, a quiet strength that accompanied him. He took the baseball that he and Elijah had signed together, a symbol of all the dreams they had. He went to the grave and placed it there, next to the stone that marked the absence of his brother. "Here it is, brother. I made it, but all of this is for both of us." That day, Joshua was also preparing for a special game. His university team would be playing at Yankee Stadium, the place he and Elijah had dreamed of being. The atmosphere was charged with a unique energy, as if the stadium itself were witnessing the fulfillment of a dream that, in some way, they both shared. The game was a milestone for Joshua. The stadium was packed, and adrenaline coursed through his veins, but he knew that this moment wasn't just about him. With every move, every play, he felt Elijah with him, as if, in that instant, they were both playing together, just as they had always dreamed. When it was his turn, Joshua was focused. With his heart racing and the bat firmly in his hands, he made the perfect play. The ball soared high, cutting through the air and going straight out of the field. It was the home run of his dreams, and somehow, it felt like Elijah was right there, celebrating with him. As he crossed home plate, he couldn't help but look up at the sky, as he always did in the most difficult moments, and whisper, "This one's for you, brother." At the end of the game, Joshua stood still on the field, looking toward the stands where the fans were applauding. Yankee Stadium, the stage they had imagined so many times, was now before him. Their dream was there, realized, not the way they had planned, but in the truest way possible. He and Elijah, together, were in that field, in that moment. Joshua felt that, in some way, Elijah was with him, sharing every second of that achievement. That feeling of companionship surrounded him completely. Joshua no longer needed to search for Elijah at every corner, in every memory. They were together, on that field, living their dream. He looked once more at the sky, his eyes misty, and knew that, no matter what challenges the future might hold, he would never be alone. Their dream had come true, and in every game, in every play, it would continue to live on. I hope you found this session helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories. See you next time.